Let's talk about something very important when you're in financial distress. Of course, people know about bankruptcy. What about if you have a small business? Let's talk to Michael Wink, a bankruptcy attorney with Wink and Wink. Michael, let's talk about bankruptcy as it relates to small business people. Many small business owners have significant debt, but and they sign for these bills personally. So do they go personally bankrupt, or do they do something with their business?
Yeah, they generally are going, a small business owner is typically looking at a personal bankruptcy. There is a business bankruptcy out there in Chapter 11, but the fees associated, it's very complicated. The fees associated with it are tens of thousands of dollars.
Usually for very large businesses.
Exactly.
Where there's no personal debt.
Exactly. It's not applicable to most small business owners. So they're looking at a personal bankruptcy either in Chapter 7 or in Chapter 13. And the good news for them in those chapters of bankruptcy is that they can get out of debt, both personal debt as well as personally guaranteed business debt. And there are mechanisms in Chapter 7 and Chapter 13 bankruptcy that can position them to stay in business so that they can continue to do what they love to do, make a living.
Well, they have that. That's what bankruptcy is all about, a fresh start.
Absolutely.
It's not to ruin somebody, but it's to help them continue.
Absolutely.
So how do they do that? How do they do that with a small business? What about their equipment and tools?
Right. Well, there is this concept of an exemption in the bankruptcy law, and exemptions are essentially descriptions of property with certain value amounts tied to them that the law says you can keep these assets going through your bankruptcy and use them on the other side of bankruptcy as part of your fresh start. And in Colorado, there is a $20,000 exemption for the so-called tools of the trade. And that means that a small business owner in Colorado can take $20,000 worth of tools, equipment, inventory, that sort of thing, through a bankruptcy without having to pay for it and utilize that on the other side. If they have more, they may be able to keep that. They might have to pay for it. But it at least gives you a foundation upon which to build from when you restart.
So people think, a mechanic who thinks, oh, my goodness, I have to sell my toolbox and all that. How am I going to make a living? There are some exemptions.
Exactly. And there's a very technical point associated with the bankruptcy exemptions as they apply to the tools of the trade, and that is that in order to be claimed, they must be owned by the small business owner personally. So a lot of small business owners have an LLC, they have an S Corp.
That's right.
They have some business entity that they operate through, and the assets may be owned by that entity. If the assets are owned by that entity, they cannot claim the exemption. And unfortunately, I've been contacted by debtors in bankruptcy who have filed, and now they're saying, no, the trustee's going to take my car or my assets because they didn't plan appropriately at the front end of their bankruptcy to essentially dissolve that entity and own the assets personally so that they could properly claim them exempt. And, I think the takeaway from that story is that if you're a small business owner contemplating bankruptcy, you really need to talk to an attorney because it's a more technical type of bankruptcy than a typical bankruptcy would otherwise be.
Right, exactly. So people in business, they're mainly doing a bankruptcy, even though it might be all business or mostly business debt. They're still doing a bankruptcy personally to get out from under that debt.
That's right. You have to put in Chapter 7 or Chapter 13 bankruptcy, you have to put all of your debts in. The good news is that personally guaranteed business debt is dischargeable, as is other personal debt. So you can sort of get out of both types of debt while keeping your assets and moving forward. And essentially, that's the goal that we're looking at for these people, which is get you out of debt, keep you in business so that you continue to do what you love and make a living and move on.
Now, can you keep essentially the same LLC or the same corporation, or does that have to be dissolved? What if it doesn't own much?
Good question. I'm glad you asked it. Basically, what we do is we have the small business owner operate as a sole proprietor. And a lot of times when we first have this discussion, there's heartburn, there's a little nerves, but then people realize it's like you're doing the same thing you were doing. You have the same customers. You have the same potential that you had. It's just now that you're operating as a sole proprietor. The business is basically an extension of you. You are John Doe doing business as whatever your business name is. It's just you don't have a legal entity. And you can ultimately reincorporate down the road, maybe a year or two, but for a while you're going to be a sole proprietor. And there are some trade-offs in that, but by and large, it's pretty seamless.
Okay, so when it comes to business debt, small business people, they need to think as individuals. They need to get a fresh start and take advantage of exemptions. And it's important then they come and see you before they're too deep in debt, because so many people, I'll bet, come to you after they've already sold tools or cashed in a retirement or things like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Planning is the key. We do free consultations. I give a lot of free advice. And it's sort of a cost of sale in our business, but it's also a pay it forward kind of thing. Finding out your rights sooner than later. We're not a high pressure sale. You can come in and find it out and do with that information what you want. But we see so many people that come in too late, and that's the worst situation.
And too late means that you've gone through exempted assets that would normally be protected. Some retirement, 401ks. You may have sold business tools. You may have gotten rid of things you don't need to get rid of in order to keep that business going. So you need to consult before you get into too much trouble. A good attorney will tell you if you're ready for bankruptcy or not. Wink and Wink is one of those attorneys. Here's how you get in touch with Wink and Wink. It's 888-NOW-WINK. That's 888-669-9465. And as Michael said, he will absolutely give free consultations and let you know where you stand. You can even give them a phone call if you're thinking about filing or if you're just now getting into financial trouble. 888-NOW-WINK. 888-669-9465. The website's very easy to remember, winkandwink.com. Winkandwink.com.